Final Fantasy. For the longest time, this franchise took me out of real-life situations and threw me into these fantastic worlds of monsters, magic, and mythical gods that I would have to fight and defeat, all while making me realize something I wanted in games that hadn't, up to that point, been popularized yet. Story. It's 1987, a time of neon clothes, poofy haircuts, and games that had been relegated, on the NES anyways, to racing, finding princesses in wrong castles, and shooting your way through maps. Up to this point, I had only played 2 games with any semblance of story: Dragon Quest and The Legend of Zelda. Both games were fun and entertaining in their own right, but something was missing. A little history note: when I was young, nearly every one of my childhood weekends were spent with my mom in a car traveling to the nicer parts of town in search of yard sales. I still remember the exact day that I got the game because my mom was looking for Christmas gifts for my sister. December 19th, 1987. We rolled up to a really nice house in Glendale, California. Their front yard looked like a market town out of the 1600s. Everything was organized by category, and every member of the family was like a store owner, including the kids. So imagine my surprise when we get out and begin to browse their wares. I meet a boy who couldn't have been any older than me at the time, standing in front of what I could only describe as a plethora of electronics, game consoles, and cartridges. As I gravitated towards the NES titles, the boy followed my gaze and told me to ask him anything about the games. I saw a game called Final Fantasy, and it was like... As I was about to ask about the game, he interrupts me and says, "That game sucks," but I couldn't help it. I couldn't help but be fascinated by the game's cover art, a beaten down battle axe and sword with a shiny crystal ball in the middle of it, and inside that crystal ball a floating castle enveloped by clouds and an airship flying towards me with the words, "Enter a whole new realm of challenge and adventure." I asked how much. The kid said,
"All the games are 25 cents each."
I only had $3 with me, so I did the only thing any sensible kid with $3 would do at that point. I walked away with 12 Nintendo games, including Final Fantasy. I couldn't get home fast enough, but once I did, I slid on my knees like a professional dancer with the box full of games in hand, took out Final Fantasy and fired her up. And then I was transported into a new world. A deep blue screen embraces my face with the text reading, "The world is veiled in darkness. The wind stops, the sea is wild, and the earth begins to rot. The people wait, their only hope, a prophecy. When the world is in darkness, 4 warriors will come after a long journey. 4 young warriors arrive, each holding an orb." And so my journey had begun. A journey fighting the likes of the Kraken, Echidna, Othoros, and Garland. When all was said and done, I was a warrior. Back to present day, to say that Final Fantasy is a part of me wouldn't be a false statement to make. I've played every Final Fantasy in the franchise, and while some are better than others, I had 2 favorites, Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII. The first few iterations of Final Fantasies opened my mind to what was possible in video games. They allowed me to perceive video games as a narrative medium. From that point on, every time there was a Final Fantasy release, my expectations would soar beyond the clouds. Now that you have a little backstory of how my love for this franchise came to be, we can talk about why we're here. Final Fantasy VII Remake has been a long time coming, but we finally have something tangible, something to see, to hear, and to feel. So first off, let's talk about the thing that stood out most to me, the music. Nobuo Uematsu has somehow taken a classic, beloved soundtrack and made it a modern classic. And what I mean by that is, the essence of the original score is there, but it sounds more surreal and fleshed out this time around. The music in Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of the main reasons to play this game, and I haven't thought that about a game in a really, really long time. gameplay. Now let's get on to something that I think is very essential to video games in general, the gameplay. Now, how the gameplay was going to be implemented in this had me worried for the longest time ever since the announcement of Final Fantasy VII Remake. But you'll be happy to know that the Final Fantasy VII Remake's gameplay is a perfect marriage between Final Fantasy VI's active time battle system and every other action RPG out there, including Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy XV. The game gives you time while still providing that pressure to allow you to make decisions from spells, calling summons, and giving orders to your characters. There's also a character switching with the click of the button, which I find fairly entertaining and useful, especially in a tight spot. There's a counter system, and the materia system is implemented from Final Fantasy VII's original, with some slight tweaks here and there. It's just something else that's incorporated from Final Fantasy VII. There's plenty of Final Fantasy VII Original here to enjoy and appreciate, so needless to say, I'm happy with the gameplay in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, I do have one single gripe with the gameplay in this, and that's when you're not in battle, the controls can seem kind of finicky. Now, what I mean by that is when it comes to selecting items, to picking up materia or opening doors on the overworld map itself, it kind of gets kind of janky, from him having to move around to hold a lever or from him trying to open a door. Cloud often gets what looks like to be confusion when it comes to trying to do these things. Now, I don't know if it's because the game itself is pushing the hardware to what I believe is PlayStation 4's limit, but it's one of those things that took me out of the game every once in a while when I had to pull a lever open a door, or pick up a piece of materia, or open a chest. Oftentimes the character model would move in such a way that it really threw me off and took me out of the game. And it's something I feel I have to mention because there are imperfections in this game. And I'm not going to put a spotlight on it because it didn't warrant enough hate for me to ignore all the positive in this game. But it is something that needs to be mentioned. Graphics. Oh my god, what can be said about the graphics in this game? I do find the occasional hiccups when you get deeper into the game around the Midgar Sector 7 slums. You'll see a couple of little pop-ins here and there. And honestly, I don't know what this is about because the rest of the game is phenomenally beautiful. It's so hard to describe and put into words that you're just gonna have to take a look.
You better be worth the money, Merc. Every last gil.
Square Enix took its time to take every character and made them look as modern as possible without breaking the original character designs, which again shows me the amount of respect and reverence that Square Enix has as a company and the rest of the creators of the Final Fantasy VII Remake have towards Final Fantasy VII Original. Sound design. Now, the sound design in video games is meant to give you a sense of immersion, something to allow you to understand the physical space that your character is actually walking in, or running in, or flying over. The sound design in Final Fantasy VII Remake is positively breathless, with sounds coming from every direction. As you walk around Midgar slums, you hear conversations between regular people who live there, you hear clanking sounds from people who are currently working, or you hear little kids playing off in a playground off in the distance. Now, I'm trying to make this as spoiler-free as possible, so I'm not going to mention too much because the sound is kind of tied into the story in and of itself. But rest assured that the sound design in this game pleasantly surprised me, from birds chirping off in the air, to monster sounds off in the distance, to swords clashing so hard that you really feel the weight of the weapons in this game when it comes to sound design. Story. Now here's where things are going to get a little tricky. The story in Final Fantasy VII Remake is essentially the same as Final Fantasy VII, with some slight deviations here and there, which I for one am not quite sure whether those deviations are for the better or for the worse.
Boy, oh boy. The price of freedom is steep. Embrace your dreams. And whatever happens, protect your honor. As a soldier! Come and get it!
All I know is that I personally was fairly entertained by everything given to me in this game. It is worth $60, there's plenty of content here to enjoy, even if it's content that you personally don't like fetch quests or side quests that are tied to the missions themselves. Now I'm going to steer clear from the rest of the story because everything towards the third act of the game is pretty much spoilers, and I would rather you guys enjoy that yourselves. And you're going to have to find out for yourself whether or not you're happy with the changes, disappointed with the changes, or just completely outright hate the changes that were being done in this game. Final Fantasy VII Remake has entertained me thoroughly, and I give it 7 Buster Swords out of 10. What did you guys think of the remake? Have you played it? Have you played the demo? What's your favorite Final Fantasy game? Put that in the comments below. And as always, play like it's your last day, and I'll catch you on the next review. Thanks for watching RockPlays. Peace out, guys.